Book 7, The Soldier in the Middle of the World, Chapter 11. Any news here? Rector Shin and Guide Zenas were finishing their review of the last delivery of block, comparing notes as to how much more they needed, when the chimes at the nearby tower clanged. They both looked up to see the message, the general's banner, the guide's banner, and the code for the second resting station. Pato began to breathe heavily, while Shem slowly shook his head. "I know what you're thinking, Pato," he said. "That's not it." Pato closed his eyes. "You don't know that." The guide took him by the shoulders. "Yes, I do. I would have felt if it was him." Furious, Pato's eyes flashed open. "But he's not your son. You don't know everything, Shem." Shem was glad the two of them were alone. It wouldn't have been good for Salem to see the guide and rector arguing, although there wasn't a person in the valley that didn't know of their heartache. They would have been understanding, but shocked at first, just as Shem was. Pato had been quiet and detached all day. Shem assumed he'd been handling the stress rather well, but instead it was handling him. Shem fought the urge to take a step away from his fuming brother-in-law, and instead held his shoulders more tightly. "No, Pato, I don't know everything, but we'll find out in about 5 minutes. We're done here. Let's mount up." The horses raced to the second resting station, Shem not worrying that Pato won. Pato slid off of Clark 14 and looked up at the canyon entrance. The tower there was bannerless, not signaling the arrival of anyone. Frantically, he scanned the trail leading to the station, looking for signs of any activity on the road, but there was no one. Shem tied up Clark 14 in silver and strolled to the second resting station, chewing on his lower lip, equally worried about his brother-in-law and the thorns. He fully expected to open the door to discover 5 pocked victims. A couple of late cases still popped up. Shem waited on the porch, watching Pato as he gazed longingly at the canyon. He was about to call him over when he heard a commotion inside. A man's voice came heatedly through the door. "So I'm trapped with you as well? I don't think so." The door swung open to reveal an angry Anoki Kaya, a pack slung over his shoulder. His eyes bulged when he saw the guide. Shem repressed a sigh. "Well, it looks like I may have interrupted something," he said pleasantly, as Versa appeared behind her husband. She sighed in relief, and Shem knew who had sent the message. He felt someone come up the stairs to join him. Pato, his nerves already ragged and his disappointment peaking, was less than congenial. "Anoki, what do you think you're doing?" Anoki shot a look at his wife. "Nothing now." Shem continued to smile warmly as he put a hand on Anoki's arm. "Let's go inside and see what we can do for you, Mr. and Mrs. Kaya." He tugged Anoki back into the station. Pato paused, glanced one last time at the empty canyon entrance, blinked back a few tears, and headed into the station. A while later, 2 more horses came rushing up the road to the second resting station. Calla cringed when she saw her husband's and brother-in-law's horses tied to the hitching post, and the station seemed very quiet. If it was young pair, there would have been much more noise and a new message at the tower, she was sure of it. But Lilla wasn't. All she saw was the 2 familiar horses. "Calla, they're already here!" she cried as she slid off her mount. She stumbled to the station just as Drusus Thorn came around the side of the building, appearing distressed. She blinked in surprise to see the 2 women. "Mrs. Zenas? Mrs. Shin? Something wrong?" Lilla stopped in her tracks, trying to interpret Mrs. Thorn's face. Calla jogged over to put a bracing arm around her sister and spoke before Lilla could. We didn't know if our husbands received the message that they were needed here, but I see they did. Any news here? Anything we can do?" Mrs. Thorne sighed heavily. "Oh, it's Versa and Anoki again. He wants to leave. Your husband's got here just in time. Anoki had his pack ready and was on his way out the door." Calla could feel her sister trembling next to her, finally realizing that young pair was not the purpose of the message. "Do you need any help?" Calla asked, hoping the answer would be something that would allow her to drag Lilla away. Drusus Thorn smiled drearily. "No, but thank you. It means so much to me that you came all this way. Your husbands have things well in hand, but I'm not sure they'll make much progress with Inoki. He's become more and more agitated these past few weeks." "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thorne. Please feel free to call us if you or your daughters need anything. And speaking of daughters, we're going to check on Lilla's oldest girls. They're both expecting soon." "Of course," Drusus said, trying to come up with a genuine smile. "How wonderful. Go, give them my best." Calla nodded and steered away her sister, who hadn't said a word. It was a good thing Mrs. Thorne didn't know Lilla well, or she would have realized her complete silence was completely unnatural. The two women went back to the horses, mounted, and headed northeast. Calla leaned over frequently, trying to guide Lilla's horse as well as her own, because Lilla couldn't see where they were going with all of the tears bubbling out of her eyes. "Are you going to do it?" The lieutenant, still on top of Trigger where he'd been all day, looked down upon the houses that lay before him. He could see an endless flow of gray farms and orchards. "You made it this far. It's only a little further." "No, it's not," he mumbled. "It's still very far away." "Just turn around and go up, young pair. That's all." "That's not what I planned to do today. I planned to see if I could make it through the forest, to see if anything was still growling and spewing, and I found nothing. The forest truly is dead." "Yes, worrisome, isn't it? How easily did you make it through?" The lieutenant smiled smugly. "Quite easily. I thought I'd be here till dinner." "I can show you where the rock entrance is, but only if you agree to go through it." The lieutenant looked down upon Edge, much easier to survey now that all the leaves and pine needles had fallen off the few trees that remained. He hadn't realized how much of the forest actually rose up the mountain until he saw it from that vantage point, and figured he was probably the first person ever to see Edge that way. He turned in his saddle and looked behind him at the pile of massive boulders that served as a barrier between the forest and the mountain beyond. "Not sure I'm in the mood to pick my way through that today, old man. I've seen enough. I need to make my report, then get back home for dinner." The words, although they came out casually, caught in his throat. Back home for dinner. He wondered if anyone had made a special one today. Why would they? Today of all days, why would they even remember? There were 12 other children, after all. "No, you don't need to make any reports for Lemuel, but you do need to do the right thing for yourself, your family, and your Creator. Look how close you are. Shem could do it in less than 4 hours. You can beat Shem, can't you?" The lieutenant gazed at the boulder field. The two women rode in silence to the eastern side of Salem. Calla hoped Sam or Con wouldn't mind hitching up the wagon to take them home in the morning. She was getting too old, or rather her behind was getting too old for this. Frequently she glanced over to her sister. Lilla's face was set and determined, but her eyes were filled with pain. Calla sent up another prayer of pleading. "Dear Creator, if there's any way Jory could deliver today, please may she? It'd be such a wonderful end to such a terrible day, the healing balm of babies." As they neared the vineyards before the two Cadby houses, where brothers Sam and Con had built houses next door to each other for their twin wives Lori and Jory, Calla noticed a familiar rider heading for them. "Mama Lilla!" Con called in surprise. "What are you doing here?" Lilla smiled weakly. "I need to see my girls today." "Well, thank goodness," Con grinned. "I was on my way to the tower to send a message for you to come." Lilla gasped. The baby! Con, if your wife's having birthing pains, you shouldn't leave her. It's not Jory, he chuckled. It's Lori. What? Now Calla gasped. But she's due later than Jory. That's what Jory's telling her, Con said. She's not too happy, so Calla, we could certainly use your calming influence today. Without another word, Lilla kicked her horse into a run to the Cadby houses. Calla looked up to the sky and grinned, then followed. She knew what had happened. She had seen Lori yesterday at the storehouse at the east side of Salem and had patted her niece's belly before she left. It was going to be a girl. Calla couldn't wait to hear Shem and Selima's explanation for this one. It was almost dark when Shem and Peto finally left the second resting station. Anoki had agreed to stay and discuss his frustrations with Guide Zenas in 2 days' time, and Versa agreed to be less confrontational. Shem suggested she started considering that people thought of things in different ways than she did, and Anoki promised to not raise his voice or threaten to raise his fist. As the two men walked to their mounts, Peto glanced one last time at the mouth of the canyon. Shem put a hand on his shoulder. I'm so sorry, Peto, he whispered. But he is still alive. I know that. There's still hope. Peto sighed. Does it ever end for you, Shem? The negotiating and comforting? No, I don't think it ever does, he said, climbing onto Silver. But that's all right. I need something to fill my days now, don't I? Peto smiled sadly at him as he mounted. A chime from the tower spun him around. Maybe, just maybe, the banners were rising. Rector Shin, emergency, tower number 21, the tower nearest the Cadby homes. It wasn't what he wanted, but it was the next best thing. He turned to Shem and smiled for the first time. Did Calla visit Jory yesterday? Shem smiled back. Not that I know of. Let me guess. You're not going home yet, right? Care to join me? Of course. I could use a little good news tonight. Mari looked to the tower when the chime sounded later that evening. She could barely make out the banners in the dying light, but she smiled when she saw it. It wasn't the news she was hoping for, but it was the next best thing. By tomorrow morning, she'd have someone new to meet again. The lieutenant stared at the large table full of food in the mansion, and something gnawed at him. There was enough there for 6 people, but he was the only one eating. Where did the rest of it go when he finished? He might have to ask about that later, if he remembered. Slowly, he climbed the stairs to his bedroom and told himself that he really did enjoy the quiet of a large house because it gave him plenty of time to think. Shem and Peto were dismounting as Calla rushed out of the house. Shem, get back on your horse, she ordered, as Peto was tying up Clark 14. Thank the Creator you're both here. Now I don't have to retrieve a midwife. Don't you have one yet? Shem asked, alarmed. We do, but for Lori. Lori? Peto said. Are you sure Lori? Calla nodded. But 5 minutes ago, Jory's waters gushed, followed by a very large pain. It looks like they're insisting on doing this together. Peto, go take care of Jory's children while Con stays with her. Luch and Wheel just took Lori and Sam's children to their house for the night. Shem, get back on Silver and go. 10 minutes later, Peto brought 2 more excited children to the Cadby's grandparents' house down the road for a sleepover with their cousins. Wheel's and Luch's eyes grew big when they realized what that meant. Wheel rushed to Jory's house while Peto helped Luch feed the little ones their dinner. Soon Shem arrived, having brought a second midwife to the Cadby homes. The 2 grandfathers and 1 great-uncle entertained the 4 little ones until their eyes finally became as heavy as the men's. When Calla went over to the grandparents' house, it was still dark, but it could have been considered morning. she found 3 men and 4 little children sprawled on the sofas in the gathering room. The 2 boys and 2 girls seemed quite comfortable, but because of their sleeping positions, the 3 men would be stiff and achy the next day. She decided to let them rest, but before she could sneak out, she heard an urgent whisper. "Calla, well?" She grinned at Pato. "Come see for yourself, Grandpa." Pato gently lifted off 4-year-old Corey and leaned him against Shem, who already had 2-year-old Anley sprawled across his chest. Shem grunted softly. Didn't really need another one. "I'll be back with a report," Pato promised. He left with Calla and they rushed over to the houses. "Well, who finished first and who finished last?" Calla chuckled. "That's still a matter of confusion, actually." "How could that be?" "I think we should start with Jory," she said, as they picked their way through the dark gardens to Jory's house. They saw the 2 midwives in conversation by their horses. "What, leaving the party so early?" Pato teased as they approached the women. They grinned back. "We could use a few hours of sleep, but we're sending out fresh help, Rector Shin," one of them said. "Then we'll be back in the morning because it's going to be quite lively around here for a time." The women chuckled. "Have a wonderful night, Rector," the other midwife said, her tone full of additional meanings as she mounted her horse. Pato nudged Calla. "All right, something's up." "Why, you're a grandfather again. That's what's up, Pato." He glared at her playfully as they made their way to Jory and Khan's house. In her bedroom, they found Jory resting as Khan cuddled a small bundle. Wheel sat next to Khan and Jory, beaming proudly. Pato grinned as Khan held the baby out to him. "A new grandson for you, Grandpa Pato. I think he looks a little like you. We'll have to ask Mugga about that, though." Pato took his newest grandson and sniffed his sweet head. "Oh, well done, Jory. How did it go?" Jory sighed. Once he decided to come, it was surprisingly fast, thank goodness. I think I'm getting the hang of this birthing thing." Pato gazed at the newborn. "Does he have a name?" "Still working on it," Jory said. "I really thought it'd be a girl." Pato looked at her with clouded eyes. "Not Perrin Cadby, please," he whispered. "All right, Papa, but we were just discussing Pato Cadby." Pato pulled a face and nuzzled the baby. "Is she really that upset you're not a girl? And I thought they loved you," he crooned to the sleeping infant. Jory and Khan chuckled. "Says the man who insisted on naming his first daughter Lorexania," Jory exclaimed. "Speaking of which, have you been over to see Lori yet?" "We came over here first," Pato said, as he stroked the baby's fuzzy head. "Excellent timing, by the way, Jory," he said softly. "I didn't know what to do with your mother today. I was sure by the evening she would have been a complete mess." "Actually, Papa, I was praying I could deliver now, to give Mama something to do besides think of him. But when Lori started having pains, I began to wonder if the Creator got mixed up as to who was petitioning him. We're not identical twins, but we definitely look alike." Pato chuckled and kissed the sleeping baby. "Well, he's perfect, Jory, as usual. I'm so proud of you." "You better go check on Lori, Papa," Jory reminded him. "She was so worried when she started having early pains yesterday." "Of course," Pato said, putting the baby into Jory's arms. "Enjoy the quiet while you can. As soon as Corey and Anley get over here, that's the end." He kissed his weary daughter on the forehead and gently cuffed Khan on the shoulder, who also looked ready for a nap. Pato nudged Calla as they left the house and walked to the other Cadbys next door. "So, what's with Lori? I think I have an idea." Calla smiled. "Just let her show you. She's so excited." They made their way to Sam and Lori's bedroom, and Pato called softly as they walked in. "So, what does my oldest daughter have to show me?" He stopped when he saw Sam. "Surprise!" cried Lori, but because she was so exhausted it came out merely as a happy murmur. In each of Sam's bulky arms was a tiny bundle. "2 more granddaughters, Grandpa Pato, and I think they might be identical because already I'm getting them confused," he chortled nervously. Pato chuckled as he went to take the 2 girls. "Well, I was wondering when someone would do this to us. Even the Briders got twins from Bubba before we got any from our children." He put one little girl in the crook of one arm and twisted his other to take the second that Sam offered. "You'll get used to doing this, Sam," Pato assured him. "I learned how to be a father on twins." He winked at his wife, who, tired but grinning, sat by Lori's bed. "We're not even sure which of the babies came first," Lila sighed cheerfully. "Lori's girls or Jory's boy. The girls came so quickly, one right after another. Then Jory's son was out and beginning to cough when I heard the first cries from over here," Calla added. "Wait a minute," Pato said, as he sat down with the newborns and grinned at their soft features. "So we have 3 birthdays on the 11th day of harvest?" Pato wasn't entirely sure of the time. Cloud cover had obscured the position of the stars. Calla shrugged. "Or the 10th, or both. We're not entirely sure. They all came somewhere close to midnight. I guess the parents could choose which day to celebrate their birthdays." "Whatever you decide," Pato said to Lori, "I have a suggestion. Don't tell any of the 3 who is the oldest, if you ever figure it out. The oldest will never let the other 2 forget it." Lori blushed. "I did tell Jory yesterday that I should deliver first since I was older than her by 5 minutes, she confessed. Pato smiled and looked down at the tiny faces. "Any names yet?" Sam sighed. "Well, sort of. If it was a girl, we planned on naming her Mari. No one's honored her yet, but now that there's 2... "Not a problem," Pato declared. "This one's Mar, the other one's Ree." Sam scowled as Lori giggled. "I don't think so, Papa." "Well then," Pato said with a mischievous grin, "Mari 1 and Mari 2. "No!" Lori laughed. "How about this?" Pato was on a roll. "Mari and Mugga. Mar and Mug, just to cut down on confusion." "Ew, stop. We'll come up with something ourselves, Papa." Pato leaned back in the chair. This takes me back to when I was a naive first-time father. I remember lying next to Lila with my 2 tiny girls that morning, wondering what in the world I'd gotten myself into. And there was no turning back. Everyone laughed as Pato positioned the babies on his chest. "Yep, feels just the same, but much better." "How so, Papa Pato?" Sam asked. Pato wagged his eyebrows. "These aren't mine during the night. They're yours. Oh, my dear Lori and Sam, you thought you had some rough nights before? Twins? Well, they have to be extra beautiful or they'll drive you insane every time you take care of them in the night." Lila rolled her eyes. He's acting as if he nursed them all night. All he ever did was poke me in the side and say, 'Someone's hungry, and while you're up, get me a sandwich.'" Everyone laughed but Pato, who didn't want to disturb his granddaughters. "I still have no memory of that, Lila," he said with feigned hurt. "And by your admission, I said that only once. A man can't be held responsible for what he mumbles in his sleep. Besides, I took care of changing their cloths." Over their chuckling, they heard a soft knock at the door. "I have 2 little ones named Encio and Gersh who want to see their mama," Shem said as he quietly walked into the room holding the children's hands. His mouth fell open when he saw what Pato was holding. "No! Lori, really? Please tell me they're twin girls." "They are, Uncle Shem," Lori sighed happily as her son and daughter came hesitantly into the room. tired and disoriented to see so many people. "Look," she said to her children, "I had one for each of you. Now you don't have to argue over who gets to hold the baby." As Enzio and Gersh timidly crawled into their mother's bed, Shem took one baby girl from Pedo, kissed her, and laid her gently on her 4-year-old brother's lap. Then took the other baby girl, kissed her, and laid her on her 2-year-old sister's lap. Sam was watching Shem closely, pointing at his motions, then dropped his hand. "Oh no," he whispered to Lori. "Now he's mixed them up, and I can't remember which is which." Lila chuckled softly and patted her son-in-law's arm. "We did that a few times. While not identical, they were very, very similar as newborns. Your wife may actually be Jory, for all we know." Sam's eyes widened in worry, and he glanced at his wife as if making sure she was the right one. Enzio and Gersh stared at the newly-borns taking up their laps. "Look at this," Shem whispered. 4 small children and not one peep. A miracle. "I'm truly impressed, Lori and Sam." Calla put her arm around her husband. "Have you been over to see Jory yet?" "She didn't have twins too, did she?" he exclaimed quietly. "No, thank goodness," Lila laughed. "One very large baby boy." Shem looked down at his wife. "Let me guess. You saw Lori when you made that delivery at the storehouse here, didn't you?" Calla nodded proudly. "And I patted her belly twice." The lieutenant opened his eyes that morning and looked at the high ceiling of his bedroom. It was just another ordinary day. Just like yesterday, just like tomorrow, nothing special. He went to eat his breakfast alone in the large eating room. By the time Lila, Pedo, Calla, and Shem headed west for the estates, the sun was high in the morning sky. They'd tried to get a few hours of sleep after the babies arrived and their siblings had settled down, but not successfully. At first light, Wheel let the neighbors know what happened, and the first shift of teenage girls eager to help the new mothers had arrived not long ago. Some of their brothers were already at work in the barn, taking care of the sheep so the new fathers could sleep. The Zenuses and Shins willingly handed over the 4 overexcited big brothers and sisters and wearily mounted their horses, ready for a nap. "And a hot soak," Calla said, wincing in her saddle. Even with the sheepskins Luch gave her, she was very uncomfortable. Lila nodded in shared misery. "This used to feel different when I was younger," she chuckled. "You were just shaped differently when you were younger," Pedo said, thinking that would make her feel better. Her raised eyebrows told him it didn't. Shem burst out laughing. "Oh, Pedo, you'll be paying for that one for a while. And there were witnesses, too." The 4 of them laughed as they nudged their horses to walk back to the estates. Calla noticed Lila was beaming. "Wonderful evening and night, wasn't it?" she asked her youngest sister. Lila smiled. "Completely. Like a pot pie, where the golden crust is perfectly flaky, the carrots and potatoes are cut to the same size as the peas, and when you slice into it, you realize someone made the surprising inclusion of spinach leaves and just the right amount of fresh thyme. Perfection." "Ooh," Shem muttered. "I know what I want for dinner tonight." "I'll give you my recipe," Lila said a bit saucily. "And you can make plenty for all of us because today I am sleeping, not cooking." Everyone laughed, and Pedo grinned at his wife. "So, last night made up for yesterday?" he asked. "Oh, yes," she said fervently. "The Creator made up for it in grand style." She looked up to the sky. "Thank you!" she hollered. Pedo and Shem flinched in embarrassment as a few people in their fields looked around in confusion. They waved uncertainly at the 4 riders, not sure what the loud thanks was for, and Shem and Pedo waved back, trying not to snort. Calla chuckled at her sister. Why not? Thank you, she called to the sky, too. Peto rubbed his forehead and glanced over at Shem. He was regarding his wife oddly and promptly smiled when she beamed at him. Peto looked up as well. Thank you, he mouthed silently. And that's the end of that chapter. Thank you.